Imagine this. The wind bites your face, and salt spray lashes across the shore. You're only 17, standing on your island's ragged coast, and your world has just collapsed. Smoke rises from your village. Men with strange voices drag you toward a ship, ropes digging into your wrists. This scene might sound like something from a movie, but for thousands of people, it was the terrifying reality of the Viking Age. When we think of Vikings, what comes to mind? Fearless warriors, legendary explorers, and master shipbuilders, right? We picture dragon-proud longships, slicing through the waves, daring raids, and epic sagas of adventure. But behind those famous stories lies a much harsher, darker reality. Slavery. From the late 700s through the 1000s, the Viking economy didn't just run on silver and trade goods. It depended heavily on capturing and selling human beings. For countless women, men, and even children, the Viking Age wasn't about glory or discovery. It was about the loss of everything, starting with their freedom. Popular culture often paints Viking raids as chaotic bursts of violence, but the truth is, they were carefully planned business ventures. Think of it like a startup. A local leader or a group of investors would finance a ship, stock it with food, sails, and weapons, and send crews across the sea. The mission: to bring back a profit. And the most reliable, valuable commodity wasn't gold or treasure, it was people. Across the British Isles, France, and Eastern Europe, villages were attacked not just for silver or livestock, but specifically for captives. Monasteries, which were often wealthy and poorly defended, became prime targets. Records from Ireland describe horrifying raids where entire groups of women were rounded up and carried away, never to return to their homes. These raids weren't random acts of aggression. They were the first step in a brutal supply chain. Once captured, people were forced aboard those sleek, iconic Viking ships. We admire these longships for their design, but for a captive, they were floating prisons. These vessels were remarkable because they could not only cross the open sea, but also navigate far up rivers, striking deep into the heart of a continent. This meant even settlements 100 miles from the coast weren't safe. The journey itself was a nightmare. Captives were packed into open ships, completely exposed to the elements: the freezing winds, the rough seas, the constant damp. They had little food or water, and many didn't survive the voyage. Those who did were stepping off one nightmare and into another, facing a future they couldn't even imagine. At the end of these voyages waited bustling trade centers. Cities like Dublin in Ireland, Hiddeby in modern-day Germany, and Barka in Sweden became massive hubs for the Viking slave trade. Here, human lives were bought and sold alongside furs, amber, and iron. Captives were paraded, inspected, and priced like cattle. And the trade didn't stop there. It was a global network. Captives from Britain or France could be sent across the Baltic Sea, down the great rivers of Russia, and sold in the sprawling markets of Constantinople and Baghdad. Archaeologists have found thousands of silver coins from the Islamic world buried in Scandinavia, clear, cold evidence of this far-reaching and lucrative trade in human lives. So what happened to these people after they were sold? Their fates varied, but none were good. Many became household laborers, or thralls, as the Norse called them. Their days were filled with back-breaking work, grinding grain for hours, hauling heavy buckets of water, weaving cloth until their fingers were raw, and tending the fires. Others were sent to work on farms or in workshops, their skills exploited for their owners' profit. Their legal status was grim. Under Norse law, an enslaved person was not considered a full person. They were property. They couldn't own anything. They couldn't testify in court, and they couldn't marry freely. In legal documents and inheritance lists, they were often listed right alongside livestock as part of a household's wealth. A free person's life and honor were protected by a complex system of laws and fines. But an enslaved person had almost no rights at all. Their entire existence, from the food they ate to whether they lived or died, depended entirely on the whims of their owner. We can even find haunting glimpses of their suffering in the poetry of the Viking era. Poems describe servants with rough, calloused hands, tired eyes, and worn-down bodies, subtle but powerful hints of the relentless, exhausting labor they endured. Modern science confirms this. When archaeologists study skeletons from the Viking Age believed to be those of slaves, they often find signs of poor nutrition and the physical toll of heavy, repetitive labor. The bones themselves tell a story of hardship. And today, DNA is revealing another layer of this history. In Iceland, for example, studies show that most of the male ancestry comes directly from Norse settlers, but a huge portion of the female ancestry traces back to Ireland and Scotland. This genetic footprint is the lasting legacy of the countless women who were taken during raids and forced to build new lives and new generations in a foreign land. For Viking chieftains and powerful families, owning many slaves was the ultimate status symbol. It was a clear demonstration of wealth and power. In a way, the freedom and prosperity of the Viking elite rested squarely on the backs of the unfree. The sagas, those epic stories we love, mention slaves all the time, but usually as background characters, rarely with any sympathy. Their suffering was just a normal, accepted part of the world. It was simply the way things were. Was there any hope of escape? For a very small few, yes. If a captive was of high rank, like a noble or a powerful member of the church, their family might be able to pay a hefty ransom for their return. But for most, slavery was a life sentence. And worse, their children would be born into the same status, their enslavement passed down from one generation to the next. So when did this brutal system finally end? It was a slow, gradual process, tied closely to the spread of Christianity across Scandinavia. By the 10th and 11th centuries, new Christian laws began to discourage the enslavement of fellow Christians. The trade didn't just vanish overnight, but it did shift. Instead of focusing their raids on Western Europe, Norsemen turned more toward the pagan populations in Eastern Europe and the Baltic regions. Eventually, over centuries, the system of chattel slavery gave way to serfdom, a different, less brutal, but still unfree system tied to medieval farming. But for hundreds of years, the Viking slave trade was a powerful and essential engine driving their economy and shaping their society. Why does this dark chapter of history matter so much today? Because the Viking Age is so often remembered for its achievements, for exploration, discovery, and courage. But those achievements were built, in part, on a foundation of human suffering. Behind every saga hero and every legendary voyage, there were countless captives whose names have been forgotten, but whose forced labor and stolen lives supported the world of the Vikings. To truly understand the Viking Age, we have to see the whole picture. We have to appreciate the daring raids, the advanced ships, and the fearless warriors, but we must also acknowledge the men, women, and children who lost their freedom. Their stories may be quiet, drowned out by the louder tales of conquest and glory, but they are absolutely essential to the truth. History isn't just about the victors and the explorers. It's also about those who were taken, silenced, and hidden in the shadows of the past. By bringing their stories into the light, we get a much richer, more honest understanding of who the Vikings really were. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, please give it a like and consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next one.